Hello, I'm Ollie, the founder of Pasture-io, and today we're going to walk through the Advanced Grazing Planner that is in version 1. Now, normally we wouldn't walk through the Grazing Planner because we're shifting all customers over to version 2. However, some features such as Advanced Grazing Planner haven't migrated across from V1 to V2, so we will quickly walk through how to do that, but hopefully in due course of time we will have the Advanced Grazing Planner in V2 for you to play with and utilize on your farm. So first, to set it up, what we need to do is just walk through setting up the program. So first we can see that there are pasture readings because there's a feed wedge. Now don't be alarmed by this feed wedge. It is each paddock has grown a lot, and that's because there are no grazings entered into this farm to graze those paddocks down. So all good there. So let's go and have a look first at the paddocks. Now on the paddocks used for, we can see forage pasture, that's good. We can see milkers, and we can see that there is ryegrass associated with each paddock. So we've got paddocks, we've got some readings which we can see here. Now these are satellite pasture measurements just for a trial, so that's why the numbers or the dates apart are fairly stretched apart. Now it's important to note that any satellite images and readings supplied during a trial are purely placeholder images and readings, and when you become a customer, the readings become a lot more frequent because we've got satellites that fly over daily, and the measurements get better because you're using the program as it should be used. So if we come over to herds, look at the milkers, so we can see there's some production data in there. Look at the herd nutritional requirements. It all looks pretty good. Next we can come down to inventory and check the feed stuff. So on this farm, the request was to add some palm kernel. So we'll add that as another group and then call it palm kernel. Now if it's fed in the bale or there's zero wastage, we can say it's 100% utilized. Dry matter might be say 90%, NDF 40, energy might be 11, 15, 70, 30. Let's put a 1 and just 0. Wouldn't it be nice if feed was free? So create feed stuff. Now just to check things off, we've got paddocks that you take pasture measurements from. So we've got readings that go on the paddocks. We've got herds that are assigned to each paddock. We've then got feed stuff now, which we can make sure that this is ticked. So here's the palm kernel. So we can untick other things that aren't currently used. Now I might just leave in some wheat and maybe some silage. Now what we can do is come across to the Grazing Planner under the Grazing menu. Now in here we might just carry on from the 24th. So we'll go the 24th, milkers, day feed, and what we can do is click Create Grazing. Now while this loads, it will open up the Grazing Planner where we can then make grazing decisions. So just quickly, what we have on within the Grazing Planner is the feed wedge, which represents the herd and the paddocks associated with the herd. We can see a pasture demand indicator over here, which purely allows you to make grazing decisions based on how much pasture you are feeding per cow for the feed. One thing I forgot we didn't check was the feed slots on the herds page. I just might quickly go and do that. So herds, back here, edit. 5 AM to 1:30 PM 2 p.m. till 3:59 a.m. Okay, so if you are happy with that, otherwise you can change that to say 50% and 50%. Normally we say, well, let's just say the day starts at 5 a.m. and finishes at 4:59 p.m. and then tomorrow morning or tonight it might start, for the night feed, it might start at 5 p.m. and finish at 4:59 a.m. But that's up to you. This also helps the computer and your employees know where cows go and things like that. So if we go back across to the grazing planner, that all looked good, so we'll just open up this last grazing. Right, so the pasture demand indicator is just that. It is just an indicator. It doesn't feed into the results or into the records. So what you can do with this is you can manipulate how much pasture your animals are getting, and then you can see what the growth rate demand is compared to the actual measured growth rate. So over here we've got actual versus the planned. Now the planned is the thing that you can manipulate. So if I feed more pasture, we'll see that the growth rate demand will increase. So there we go, it's 51. So it's what we can do is say, oh, okay, we've got a growth rate of 48.5, so we want to feed 12.4 kilos per animal per feed to get to that 51.3. Now, that might not work in theory, so we could say, okay, well, let's feed a lot less, and that way we get our NDF or dry matter, depending on if you're working on dry matter or NDF as your determinant or gut field determinant. So you can change that under edit here. We can change target NDF. So now it's saying 8.4, or target dry matter now. Now we've deselected that, so now it's targeting dry matter at 8.4 kilos. Or if we're to target NDF, it's now targeting NDF at 6 kilos. So it depends on what your feed ration is and things like that, to if you're going to target NDF or dry matter. And to be honest, it will change during the year based on, you know, the fiber content of your pastures and how much throughput the cows are going with their feed and things like that. So once we're happy anyway, we can largely ignore that anyway, and say, okay, well, we're feeding roughly 14 kilos a day, so 7 kilos of feed. So the growth rate demand is roughly 30 kilos a day. We need a rotation length of 44 days and offer 2.3 hectares per feed. We're going to ignore all of this now, and we can come down to the Paddocks table. So this is where the middle section, where you can see paddocks, feed and nutrition, this is where you largely make most of your decisions. So the feed wedge up the top here gives you a good understanding of if you really need to tighten up on your round, or if you can be a lot looser with your feeding and things like that. The pasture demand indicator also helps you understand that by what sort of pressure you can put on, how much feed you're feeding your animals, to what impact that is on what your grazing round should be and in days, and how many hectares to feed per feed, and what the growth rate demand is versus what the growth rate is. So you've got things like, you can look at that as leaf stage if you want, and understanding if you're going to be grazing harder, quicker or slower than what your actual growth rate is. Anyway, all that aside, let's move down to the paddocks table. Now, down here, what we have is paddocks area, growth rate per paddock, and pasture cover as of the date that is selected. We have days grown, so there are no grazing events so far, and days since N was last applied, and we can see grazings available from this paddock. We'll just ignore this last column, animals required for this feed. Let's just focus on grazings available for this paddock. So say we wanted to get 3 grazings off this paddock, we could simply select that paddock. Now, if we want to bring the dry matter content up, but we've got to bring the pasture down, so we feed slightly less, and you can see that the grazings available from this paddock is now 3, just by manipulating how much they're being fed. We can come across here to edit. Now, this is when we can bring across, say, 3 kilos of palm kernel. So that was maybe, if that's 3 kilos a day, it'd be roughly 1.5 a feed. Just keeping in mind that with this farm, the feed slots were split 60-40, so you might want to feed whatever 60% off 3 is. It might be 2.8 or something, I'm not sure, and 1.2 for the 40%. So once we've got it like that, we can see that we've got 3 grazings available, and we've lifted up the dry matter to 100%. So if we take that out to 0, we can see that the dry matter is empty. So if we slowly lift that up, we'll see that the charts also increase. Now, if you're not quite familiar with things like crude protein, energy, and NDF and those sort of things, we can simply just come along here and just hide them if you want, and we can just simply work on, say, dry matter and energy and those sort of things. Now, what we can do once we've got that paddock selected, so that is paddock 121, we can come across here and we can say, well, we're currently in the day feed, and we'll send them into the night and day feed as well. So that'll give us our 3 grazings. Now, when I open up when I press save grazing, we can now see that it's saved paddock 121 for its 3 grazings. And we can see that after its first grazing, there were 2 grazings remaining. After the second grazing, there's 1.06 grazings remaining, and after the third grazing, there was 0.12 grazings remaining. Now that's because the paddock has kept growing. So because we just blanket put that out and didn't change the feeds. So this is really good if you step through each grazing, say over 8 grazings across a paddock. You can then start off with more silage or more palm kernel or something like that, and then reduce the amount of feed over time. So let's go and make a night feed for the 25th. So we come into the 25th here. Night feed, create grazing. Just bear with the speed. That's why version 2 is being built. So it's just a lot quicker to use. So, but since we need the grazing planner, this is what we're dealing with. So let's try something a bit more drastic. So for example, if we want to, we've got palm kernel is in there at 1.5, so it's remembered how much palm kernel we were feeding. Now what we can do is, if we want to get 2 feeds out of this paddock 99, so what we'd need to do is feed a lot less pasture, say half the amount of pasture. You see it's now 2. I won't stuff around too much. 2.01, that's near enough, close enough. So if we want to keep feeding the same amount of palm kernel, we can simply add in other supplements. Now we're going to feed a whack of silage. Now it looks like it's capped out at, so we can change what it will cap out in. If you remember when I made the palm kernel, in the feedstuffs page, there was a maximum amount you can feed per cow per day. Now that will be divided by the feedstuff percentage. So in this case, 12 out of 20 must be 60%, and 8 out of 20 must be 40%, or near enough. So what we can do is we can increase the palm kernel if we wanted to, if we're feeding to dry matter as being the determiner of gut feel. Now if we come back over here and look, we've still got grazings available from this paddock is 2. So another thing we can do before we save those 2 grazings, we can look down here at the totals and we can see if you have a feed wagon or something like that with scales on it, or if you're feeding out round bales, you might say, okay, my bales weigh 500 kilos each, therefore, or 500 kilos wet weight each, therefore there are 10 bales I need to feed out per feed. And you can say something similar with your palm kernel. You might say, oh, that's 3 buckets worth or something. So what we can do for paddock 99 in the notes, we can come down here and say, let's make 2 night feeds out of paddock 99. So we can come down here to the next date, which is 26. Now we can say to employees, we can say feed 10 bales of pasture silage. And we could even say and split paddock in half. So that's a lot of bales for 355 cows. So hopefully you're grazing a bit more pasture than that. But this is just an example. So if we go save and next now, this will actually kick us to the 26th of the 10th. And this grazing here will get saved. So we'll go here, save and next. Now, if we go looking for days grown, paddock 99 is here. Now I think we were feeding, no, let's just not play with that for now. So we'll sort by pasture cover. Now we come over here, might just lift that up again. Now drop that down. So all these numbers will make more sense when you get grazings in there and when you get pasture measurements and things like that. We can see over here on this feed wedge, the 2 paddocks over to the right, paddock 99 and paddock 121, have already dropped to the bottom of the feed wedge. So the feed wedge will clean up and along with fresh pasture measurements, it will clean up as well. So not to worry. So likewise, if we wanted to get, if we want to split 2 paddocks, we can say, oh, there's paddock 98 and 104 at 9.4 kilos for the feed. So we might drop the ryegrass out completely. We might drop the palm kernel back down to 1.5 kilos. Or we might actually say, okay, let's actually drop the palm kernel out completely. Feed if we feed less, no, feed more, sorry, I'm getting confused. If we feed more, we can get those closer to 1.5. So if it was possible to eat that much pasture, it might be on your farm, I'm not sure how big your cows are, but that's a lot of pasture. And if we're not supplementary feeding, it might be possible. Especially if it was lush, but this is at 4,300, so it probably should be silage. Beside the point, we can see that these are both now 1.5 grazing, so what we can do is we can select those paddocks. Now we've got 3 grazings, and now we can essentially, what we'd do is we would graze the first one, so paddock 104, so just go save grazing, and then we can see these other ones in here. So we go 104, and then we go 104 on the 26th, so on the 27th we make a grazing. Now keep in mind, I'm doing this quite slowly, but you should be able to knock out a week's grazing in, well, I used to be able to do it in about 5 to 10 minutes, like 7 days worth of grazings, 14 grazings, bang, 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 and it was all done. Then you don't have to think about it for the week. So we come across here, we go day feed. So it just takes getting familiar with the program. So we've got 104, so we need to go and find 104. Easiest way to do that is just there. Now, I think we had that feeding roughly 9.4 kilos or something. So we've got paddock 104 selected, and now what we can do is go and find from the top of the feed wedge, I think it was paddock 98. So we select paddock 98. We've got 2 grazings now. So what we're doing now is we're splitting the grazings across both paddocks. So now we can go, okay, let's go save and next. And then we're going to go and graze the last grazing off paddock 98. So days grown, paddock 98, select that. What was it, 9.4? A little bit less, might have just chewed a bit too hard. Oh, that's right, because this farm has a different weightings. It's not 50-50, so it's like there might be 40% of the feed for the night feed rather than the day feed, 60% of the feed. So we've got paddock 98 at 101, and now we can save grazing. We could even write a message here and say feed last third off paddock, if you had a break fence up or temporary fence or something like that. So we save the grazing. So as you can see, we've made a whack of grazings here. We've got 98 and 104, they were together. I might actually go into this grazing, because what we'll do in this grazing when it loads is I might just say, which one was it? 98, feed first 2/3 of paddock, and this one might be feed last third of paddock. Save grazing, and then what we'll do is we'll go over to finally last thing we'll look at. So that's the grazing planner. You can have fun in there. You can make all the different types of grazings you want. We can then come across here to reports and go to the rotation report. Now in the rotation report, what it does is it starts from today's date and ends on the last day there is a rotation. Now today's date is past when we made that rotation, so let's go back to the 23rd. So here we can see all the grazings, so we can print this out. You can look at it on your phone, do whatever you want. Basically we've got 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 27th. So we've got day, night, day, night, day. What's going on there? Day, night, day, night. They swapped around day, night for some reason. Day, night. And then we can look at the milkers only if you had multiple herds. And then we can choose the different types of feedstuffs if you just wanted to look at one type of feedstuff. That might be if you maintained palm kernel or you're feeding concentrate in the dairy and you don't necessarily need it there because it just doesn't change. So it's not something you really need to communicate with employees or yourself. It's just something you do. You just might want to see ryegrass or something. We can also see that in kilograms of weight. So that means that it might be easier to interpret, especially if you've got scales on your feed wagon or if you just know the wet weight of your silage bales and things like that. So here's that paddock where we had the massive amount of silage. So when we said, 10 bales of pasture silage and split paddock in half, and then you can see that we can leave notes for each individual paddock and things like that, which helps give instructions on what to do. Hope that was quite explanatory. I hope I explained how the grazing planner works. It does look quite daunting from the outset, but really the crux of it is you're feeding cows. They've got different requirements. You've got grazing grass, and then you're just balancing how much grass you're putting into the diet based on what sort of feed is on hand. And then, of course, you need to make your own calculations on, is it a financially wise decision to feed wheat instead of silage or reduce stocking rates and things like that. At the end of the day, it's about trying to make those really good grazing decisions so then you can be confident in in what you're doing on your farm. So until we talk again, cheers.